So it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Mark Warren. Mark is the owner of Medicine Bow Wilderness School in Dahlonega. For over 45 years, Mark has been teaching about nature and the survival skills of the Cherokee. He's also, in addition to being a teacher, Mark is a writer. He's written books about the things that he is an expert in, that he's teaches about, and he told me earlier today that he's really enjoyed the writing aspect, and I think you'd like to be able to do more of that. Hopefully you are. He's going to talk to us today about the land that we live in, where we live. The Cherokee obviously inhabited this land before us, before the Europeans came to this country. So North Georgia and North Carolina was part of their habitat, so to speak. So we look forward to Mark's presentation. There's one thing he had on his list that I found interesting that I wanted to share with you, is that he's, in addition to being a teacher and a writer, he was a national champion in whitewater rafting. It's been a few years ago. Canoeing. Whitewater canoeing. I'm sorry. Yes. I'm sorry, that's a slip, because I used to do whitewater rafting, not to the level that you do canoeing. So that's a slip for me. And then the other thing, you were a world champion in the longbow competition. And so that's impressive. Mark, we welcome you and look forward to your presentation. Please welcome Mark Warren.
Thank you. I want you to think for a moment about the world in terms of just nature. You all know that we've all read enough from plenty of books about the history of the world. There was a time when there were no people, right? There was a time when there were no flowers. All of the plants were fern-like and reproduced by spores. No flowers were made. And then that changed. And the change is part of something that became a huge conflict among philosophies with people. It's all about that word, evolution. It offends some people. I don't see it interfering at all with religious beliefs, because I think that evolution is this invisible force that we'll never see, but it exists, and the force is there to do experiments with nature. We don't understand how some of them happen. We understand how some happen, like overexposure to ultraviolet rays or exposure to radiation. Those can cause what we think of as birth defects. But you have to also remember that there are birth advantages that changes sometimes show us. And that's the way that plants and animals evolve to become as successful as they are. So there was a time when there were no people. Think about that time for a moment. If you can, think of this very land here at Bent Tree before any people were on the planet. And plenty of animals, but no people. Now think about one seed that's fallen to the ground. Maybe that seed was in the middle of a piece of fruit and it was eaten by a bird, and the bird flew away 3 miles from here, and then finally the seed worked its way through its digestive system and the seed was dropped to the ground. The seed lands on the earth. Doesn't it make sense to you that because nature has this invisible force of making things successful, doesn't it make sense that everything that seed needs is there for it to grow. You know, once it sprouts its taproot and it really solidifies its place in the world, and then it starts to send up a stem, and then the seed leaves develop. All that's going on through this time that the young roots of this plant are sucking up water with things dissolved in it. But everything that it needs is part of that cocktail that it's soaking up. Doesn't that make sense? That that seed should find everything that it needs right here. You can say the same thing for animals. Think of a young fox that's born right here, a gray fox. Isn't everything that it needs right here on the planet? I mean, where can it go for help if there's something missing? Nowhere. You know, the world is what it is, and a being born into it uses what is there. And if there's something missing, then doesn't that species of animal or plant die out? Nature, the story of natural history is all about things achieving success. And this includes humans. It makes perfect sense to me. If you followed my line of thought in what I was just explaining to you, it makes sense to me that everything that a human needs is here. And that includes medicines. A lot of people look down on the concept of medicines that are out in the woods because, you know, we call that, often refer to that as folk medicines, because there's so many folk tales about how to use plants, and many of those folk tales are very misleading and false. So it would be dangerous to just go out and act on folk tales that you've heard about plants. I've had several people come to my classes and try to push some of those on me, telling me that a certain plant is edible because their grandfather said so, when I know that the plant is not edible, for example. Everything that we need includes medicines. There are times when we need help in things that happen to us, accidents, and disease is part of the world, isn't it? Pathogens are here on the world, and they serve a purpose. We sometimes carry them inside ourselves, and they serve a purpose in us. But I wanted you to get an idea of this feeling of balance that exists, and that we belong here on this planet. We have a very unique place in it because we have the ability to so-called master it all, to control it all, don't we? And no other animal can say that, or, you know, if it could talk. But every animal, of course, has its specialty and fits into this big, complicated story that we call ecology. So I want to set your mind at ease about what you're about to hear. You're not going to hear anecdotes and interesting little folk tales about plants. You're going to hear legitimate uses of plants that you can use. But the most important part in this whole process is that you identify the plant properly. If you make a mistake on that, it could be very fateful for you, because there are many toxins out in this natural world that could do you in, and some of them in horrible ways. I'll just mention one of them. Mountain laurel. Eat a leaf of that, and you've got 6 hours left in your life, and that 6 hours is miserable. It includes vertigo, headache, blindness, irregular heartbeat, stomach cramps, and then finally, your diaphragm muscle fails and you suffocate. That's just one story. So the world of nature is not a Walt Disney version. In many ways, I wish it were. You know, I would love to go out and be able to call the animals down to me and frolic with them. But that's just not the way it is. What I'm going to share with you are things that I've used. If I haven't had a need for them, for example, there's one that I'm going to show you here today that is just miraculous at how it can cure one of the main problems that the Cherokees suffered from as a race. These things work. Now, I've never had that problem myself, but I met a gentleman in my county who did have that problem in a big way, and he'd had it all his life. I'm keeping this a little secret right now so I can spring that plan on you in a little bit as a surprise. But the problem was resolved for him completely. He never had another episode after using a certain plant. So the things I'm teaching you today are reliable and you can trust them, but you have a job in this equation. You have to be able to identify those plants. After I leave here today, I would just hate to think that one of you saw a plant that you thought, oh, isn't that plant Mark talked about? I think I could use that for so-and-so. But, it's the little details that you've got to look at. So I want to help you with those details today too, to know what to look for so you can make a positive identification. I like to start a talk about medicine with fire because it's such an important part of making some medicines. You often need to heat water. Now, I come at all this from the survival skills perspective. I'm not an herbalist. So I never deal with tinctures, for example, because I don't know how to go out in the woods and find alcohol. So I deal with things that are made quicker, and the most complicated thing I use is a tea, an infusion, which you make all the time. Easy to do. And things that can be used right away. An herbalist has an apothecary, a collection of all kinds of herbs that have been dried. And I don't have that. What I have is the woods. And I think of the woods as the medicine cabinet. So let's jump into this and learn some of these. And feel free to ask some questions along the way if you want. I want to point out one part of this pyre. See that little collection of tiny wood in there? I want you to know where that comes from because we have a tree here that is very common. It's called mountain pine by the locals. In a book, you would see it as white pine. The tallest tree in Eastern America. Did you know that? And white pines grow all the way up the Appalachians, all the way up into Canada. So they're very common. It's the state tree of Maine, for example. We've got lots of them here. That tree gives us quite a gift for the fire maker. You notice on the white pines how the lower limbs are dead? All trees do that, They allow the lowest limbs to die off because they don't get much sunlight, and the tree really doesn't want to invest in those limbs when it's got newer limbs up closer to the sun. So the fact that white pine holds on to those dead limbs for so long is a real gift to a fire maker. White pine makes a chemical called terpene, Terpene, highly flammable. And the terpene remains in the wood even after the wood is dead. So you've got a tree that's acting like a drying rack for you if you're a fire maker. It's just waiting for you to come out and find your kindling there. You can't ask for a better kindling. Easy to gather. Look how tiny the branchlets are. Can you see them? How tiny those are? A handful of those, just a handful, a mound in my hand. If I placed that on a grill so that it was safe, and I lit it, you would have about 2-foot high flame from that because it's chemical burn. The medicine that I use more than any other with my students is red maple. It is the best medicine I have ever encountered for serious burns. It's better, in my opinion, than the things that you get from the pharmacy. It is just so impressive. If you ever have the chance to use it, you will find that you will be talking about it to everybody. It's so impressive. And the main reason is when you apply the medicine, and I'm talking third-degree burns here, the pain goes away. And then it starts a healing process by doing this. It actually agitates the live cells at the border of the burn. You know what a cell does when it gets agitated? It reproduces. We call that healing. It speeds up the healing process. And then this medicine leaves behind a film on your skin after the water evaporates, and the film serves as a bandage to keep out the possibility of secondary infection, which is so common with bad burns. So let's look at maple for a moment. Let's figure out how to recognize it. In our area, we have about 5 trees that have this one unique feature to them, and maple is one of them. They grow their leaves opposite one another, like our arms are opposite, as opposed to like this, which would be alternate. Most plants have alternate leaves. Maple has opposite leaves. We'll see at least one more tree today in this program that has opposite leaves. If a tree has opposite leaves, it also has mostly opposite limbs too. So if you know those 5 trees, and I'm sure somebody's wanting those right now, so I'm going to just spout them out real quick. Maple, ash, buckeye, dogwood, and viburnums. Those are the trees. And maple includes the tree that we call box elder. That's also a maple. So that's one feature that really helps you to narrow down, because if you're looking at a tree with opposite leaves, you've only got 5 choices. So that's going to be an easy narrowing down to figure out what that is. If you look at one leaf, you'll see that it's somewhat star-shaped. It's got rather irregular teeth all around the margin. And I mention that because one leaf that's very commonly confused for this is sweet gum. And sweet gum has a very orderly row of teeth around the edges of its lobes. The lobes are the parts of the leaf that stick out, kind of like appendages. I'll point a lobe out. So there's your whole leaf. That's one lobe. That's one lobe. That's another. Red maple has usually, you can never say always in nature. If you ever do that, you're setting yourself up to be disproved about something. I've learned that many times. But usually red maples have red leaf stalks. And you can see that on this picture. If you look closely. The bark of maple has a rather difficult description. It's hard to just say in a few words what that bark looks like, but with the young trees, saplings, it's very smooth, but a lot of saplings have very smooth bark. And as it develops, maple tends to have fairly long splits in the bark that run vertically. And you'll have sections that are very smooth and then some that are very cracked. It's just one that you have to see a good bit and learn it yourself, instead of hearing it somebody else try to describe it. All right, here's how to make the medicine. It's just so simple. Whatever container you have that can hold water, and in history that's been, I'm sure, army helmets, the stomachs of deer, which are good vessels to boil water in, which have been used. But if you're thinking of home, how about a saucepan? Or how about a metal drinking cup? Whatever you're thinking of. You fill it with green leaves from this tree. So this is a summertime use that we're talking. And the leaves are fully out. You fill your container with green leaves. You boil the water separately somewhere else. And then you pour that just boiled water over your leaves. Now, if you put boiled water on green leaves, guess what happens? Nothing. Because all the chemicals that are inside the leaves are already in water. Because the leaves are full of water. That's the conduit medium that exists in all plants. It's a circulatory system, just like ours is blood. With the plants, it's water. Once you've poured it in, you now have some work to do to get the chemicals out into the water. Now, I'll stop here for a moment and say, if we're ever talking about doing this with dried leaves, that's a whole different story. And you know that story, because tea bags are full of dried leaves, aren't they? And when you put the tea bag in hot water, you know what happens. You see it happen. Diffusion. That just doesn't happen with green leaves. So you have to be brutal to get these chemicals out. You need a blunt-ended tool. It could be a branch that you carve flat on the end. And you have to crush those leaves until that water has cooled. So the timing on this all depends on how big your container is, right? If you have a real big pot that you're doing this in, that's going to take a long time to cool. But a cup, not long at all. So many times I've done this with a cup when we've had a burn at camp. And it's so common because a lot of the folks who come to my classes are not yet, let's say, inducted into this world of woods lore and, you know, living around and working with fires, and they just forget. I remember this young man. He was 20-something years old, very, very bright and very eager to learn. And he came from Atlanta, and he just didn't have woods experience. And he was heating up something on the fire to eat, and he had a saucepan with a metal handle, and he just didn't think. And he reached for it and picked it up and burned his hand very badly, lots of pain. So that's why we made this up for him. So after crushing it, now it's just a matter of applying that liquid to the burn. So in his case, we had about a saucepan size, so he could put his hand down in it. And I'll never forget that look on his face. He was in anguish with this burn, and he put his hand down in there, and he looked at me, and this big smile just broke out on his face. And I've seen that happen over and over. Especially with children, it's a very teary face that suddenly breaks out with his smile. What a paradox it is to see all those tears as a backdrop to a big smile. But it works beautifully. So that's our first medicine for you to learn. The red maple as a burn medicine. Anybody have a question about that? Yes, sir.
Is it only with the green leaf?
Yes, sir. Only with the green leaves, but you can use the medicines in this tree any time of the year, but you'd have to go in winter to the roots, because that's where the liquids are stored during the winter. Do y'all ever think about why do trees lose their leaves, and why does all the water go down in the wintertime? All that process is for one reason, is to protect the tree from exploding from ice formation inside of it. Trees can literally explode if they can't get rid of their fluids before the first freeze. So the leaves aren't going to be able to work in that situation with no fluids, so the tree goes into a dormancy. Yes, sir. You can store this for a time. I can't tell you how long, because my experience with these things is always use them as we need them. So like I told you, I don't have that room full of medicines, but this one I know you can. And here's why. A doctor came to one of my classes and told me about a patient of his. And the patient had been accidentally pushed onto some very hot machinery, and he landed right on his chest on it. And this man had a burn the size of a soccer ball. And so this doctor has been working on him for 3 months. And he got the burn, which was festering. You know, the wound just looked awful. It was pus and oozing always. And he got it reduced to the size of a softball, and he couldn't get it to reduce anymore. So he wanted to try this. He made up a batch of this. He gave it to his patient. His patient kept a jar of this. And over a period of a little more than a week is all that it took for this man. So we can tell you that at least it lasts for a week and a half, because in 9 days, it was gone. The wound was gone. So what the man did was, every day, 3 times a day, he dipped a washed rag into the jar and wrung it out a little bit. He lay down, he put the washcloth over his wound and just stayed there for 10 or 15 minutes. After 9 days, the doctor called me, said, healed. Yes. It's not been identified, but it's suspected to be some proteins that are made in the leaf. Did you know that green leaves make proteins? If you're vegetarian, you know all about that, which is why you combine certain foods to get all the amino acids. Okay. There's our white pine that we gathered kindling from for the fire. Here's how to recognize white pine. Almost all pine trees develop what we call compound leaves, which means that each leaf is made up of leaflets. In this case, they're needles. But have you ever noticed that on most pine trees, you see that the needles are actually clustered together by a little bark-like sheath called the fascicle? And around here, all pine trees that have clusters like that come in either 2s or 3s, except for this one. White pine clusters in 5s. So if you go up to a pine tree and find one little cluster and count it, then you haven't proved anything yet. You got to look at maybe half a dozen. And you're probably going to find out of that half dozen, at least 4 of them are going to show you 5 needles. Remember, you can never say always in nature. So every different leaf is not going to be divided into 5 needles, but most of them, by far, most of them are. So that's a great way to identify the white pine. I should mention that there are some pine trees that don't have clusters, just single needles. And around here, that would be hemlock, the hemlock tree. Don't let that word scare you. There's nothing toxic in a hemlock tree. The hemlock poison comes from an herb that looks more like Queen Anne's lace, which I'll bet you know. Not a tree at all. We have a medicine here. The medicine here has the ability to work as an expectorant. And that's something that's designed to help loosen up infected mucus in your bronchial tubes and separate it from the mucosa, which is your tissue. And then there's a kind of tickling sensation, you know, when something's loose here, and it makes you cough, and you cough it up and spit it out. So it's helping you to loosen up the infected mucus that's in your bronchial tube so that you can get rid of it. The word expectorate means to spit. That's why it's called this. So that's the last phase of this little medicine's action, you know. All that goes on and then you spit it out, expectorate it. So how do we get this? Pine trees make terpenes, right? And terpenes are the basis of turpentine, and like I said, highly flammable, but there's a little problem with terpenes. If you ingest too many terpenes, your stomach will be so irritated by the terpenes that you'll be nauseated. Now this happens to be one of the trees whose inner bark you can eat as a survival food, but you can't eat it raw. You've got to first drive the terpenes out, and you do that with heat. To make the medicine, we don't have to worry about that because it's a small amount we're using. Let me show you how we go about getting it. It's in a part of the tree called the inner bark. How many folks in this room have ever heard of that term before, inner bark? It's not well known, and obviously I can see that here. I think only one person raised a hand. Everybody knows the outer bark, right? We see that all the time. And that's the way we recognize a lot of trees. The inner bark is the next layer in. If you were to take a knife and shave away all the outer bark on a tree, the very next layer would very much look alive. The outer bark's dead. Nothing's happening with the outer bark. It's cork. It's just cellulose. But the next layer is very much a flesh of the tree called the inner bark. And it's rather a slim sleeve that goes all around the tree, around every branch. And you know what its purpose is? It carries all fluids inside the tree down the tree. Never up, always down. So that's the down elevator that sends material down to the roots. Roots have got to have food. The leaves make the food. Roots have got to have antiseptics. The leaves make antiseptics. Roots have got to have salicylic acid to keep them fresh. The leaves make that. All that travels down the inner bark. So how does water get up the tree then? Anybody know that? It's the next layer in, and that's called the sapwood. And that's what sucks up fluids to go to the leaves, so all this miraculous stuff can happen in the leaves. The making of all these chemicals. And every white pine tree follows the same recipe and makes the same list of chemicals. A white pine here makes exactly what a white pine at my place makes. And by the way, one of those things is protein. So there is something that happens right at the border of a leaf, where the leaf stalk emerges from the branch. That's another thing that I find most people don't know about. So this is a very profound thing, so listen carefully to this. The tree leaves make all the chemicals that the tree can make, but then certain chemicals are allowed to go down to the roots, and certain chemicals are never allowed to go down to the roots. And the ones that remain in the leaves are often, it's a combination of things, but one of those is often a strong toxin to protect the leaf from being eaten up by insects or other predators, such as wildlife that eat leaves or whatever. So you see what I'm talking about here? There's an important separation of chemicals that you can depend on, and those toxin-free chemicals are coming down the inner bark. So you see how that can be a source of medicine for us or from food? Because the toxins are not in there. Here's an example for you, if that's a concept that's kind of questionable to you. Everybody knows that you can eat a tomato. Did you know you cannot eat a tomato vine? It's toxic. And that's why tomatoes for so long were never eaten. They were believed to be toxic. And then, until somebody just said, hey, watch this. And a doctor did this and ate a tomato, and everybody went, wow, we didn't know you could do that. Well, the separation of toxins is such a big deal in this study of medicines, because there are certain trees whose inner bark we can use as a medicine, and we cannot use the leaves. So let's look at how to get that inner bark. This is a picture of removing inner bark. Now what you see here is a living branch of white pine. The log in the background is just my workbench. But that branch there is a living branch, and I have already carved away the outer bark, and that's the gray. So that outer bark is gone from that little section. What you're seeing next that's peeled up is the inner bark. And the inner bark consists of two things. You see that green layer? I'm going to have to brag a little bit on my knife skills here. The fact that you can see that green layer means that this was really nicely done. Because let me tell you why I can say that. Guess how thick that green layer is? 1 cell thick. That's called the cambium. This is the magical part of the tree that makes every cell that the tree is going to have in its body. It makes every physiological part of the tree. That's a very important part, the cambium layer. Almost every book that I read tells you the cambium layer is the same thing as the inner bark. That's incorrect. It is one small part. Small in physical terms, huge in philosophical terms because of what it can do. But the inner bark also consists of all those tubes that carry water down the tree. So it's a whole bunch of tubes, and you can see them all pulled up there. And because the inner bark has pulled up, can you see that little bit of wood that's revealed from where it's pulled up? Sapwood, that's the next layer. And then you'd go through the sapwood if you were interested. If you were interested in dissecting this, what would be the next layer? It's called heartwood. It's all dead. And its whole purpose there is to be the backbone of the tree, to hold it up. And the very last part of the tree, or the dead center, anybody know what that is? The pith. Water storage, and also it strengthens the tree because it's a very loosely filled or maybe a hollow tube in the middle, and that makes a tree more bendable, which makes it stronger. It doesn't break as easily. A bendable thing can sometimes be called stronger than a very stiff thing because it's harder to break it. So that is inner bark, what you see curled up there. Now, how much do we need for this medicine? Here's the rule of pinky. It's not the rule of thumb this time, but the rule of pinky. The outline of the person's little finger who needs this medicine, that's how much you use. So there's a rectangle that you cut. But here's what I like to do, and this is kinder to the tree. I cut half as wide, but twice as long. It's the exact same dosage of chemicals that I'm putting into my medicine, but it does less harm to the tree. Because you're working on a limb that's on the tree, and after you leave it, you leave a little bit of destruction there. The tree will scab over it. It can't heal it. It'll scab over it. But there's a fine line there all the way out that limb, which will become not functionable because it can't send its fluids back down. In other words, I've made a little gap in there that interrupts the flow. Now, the wider that gap is around the limb, the more of that limb is affected, right? Never do this on the trunk of a tree. That affects a lot. Just do it on a limb. And here's a little wisdom you can take from the Cherokee on this. Always do this on the south side of a tree. For a long time, scientists just thought, oh, that's just kind of a formula that's of hocus pocus that was followed. Kind of like the Cherokees circled a tree 4 times before they approached it for medicine. Did you know that? They observed it on 4 revolutions. That's called inspection. That's making sure that you've got a healthy tree. Then they approached it not only from the south because it's the south side of anything that gets the most sunlight over the year time. And so, if you remove some bark from a tree on the south side, the sunlight disinfects. It's safer to take it from the south side. The sunlight protects the tree there. Do it on the north side where the sun never gets, and you have much more opportunity for pathogens to successfully invade the tree. So, 1 cup, 1 empty cup, and I mean literally a cup in measurement. Put your bark in there, that bark that I described. I can only tell you about my little finger. I don't have a finger that's the right shape, but picture this twice as long and half as wide, okay? That's your formula for how much you cut away. You put that into the cup, and notice that the outer bark is removed. And that's to help get all the chemicals into the water. Boil water separately, and then pour that water into your cup. Let it sit for 20 minutes. You have your medicine. That is so simple. Here's another tree that grows its leaves opposite to all the dogwoods except for one dogwood whose name is alternate-leaved dogwood. Because that's so unusual that the dogwood has that. Let me talk to you first about identifying so that you can be sure to know. This is the flowering dogwood. That's the one that most people are familiar with. It has a flower with white parts, flowers about that big, and the 4 white parts, I'm calling them parts because they're really not technically petals. They're another part of a flower. The flower is actually that small part in the dead center. But it's the flower that you're familiar with. I'm sure Atlanta is the dogwood city. You know, that's its nickname, and that's the dogwood that they're talking about. Take a look at the bark. It's very reptilian, isn't it? The Cherokees call this the alligator tree. All right, take a look at a leaf. We're going to look at the veins of the leaf first. First, we have the midrib vein. And then from that, we have lateral veins. This is the most advanced vein pattern on the planet. It started with, there were plants with no veins for a long time. No veins at all. Water could not be pumped through the plants. We still have some of those plants around. Every time you feel some comfortable, interesting moss with your hand, you're feeling one of those plants. It holds water physically like a sponge does. It doesn't have water pumping in through it. It holds water because of its complicated texture. It's kind of like a rug, isn't it? You know how heavy a rug is when you try to pick it up when it's soaking wet? Incredibly heavy. So it's designed well to hold water for a long time. All right, so you're looking at an advanced vein pattern. This is what's called veination in terms of botany. But this one is really unique. Look what the lateral veins do. They don't go out to the edge of the leaf and terminate. They bend away from the edge of the leaf. That's even given its own name in botany. It's a very unique kind of bending of the lateral vein. So look for that. Here's another thing you can do. If you're really patient, I should say it this way. I don't think of people as being patient or impatient. People show impatience a lot, but we all have patience in us still. We get that from our ancestors. Patience was a thing that once probably had no name because it was the norm. You had to be patient in order to survive. For example, think of a young boy with a fishing spear standing on a rock. His parents told him to go down and get a fish, so he's waiting on the rock. I guarantee you this would never happen in history. How long do I have to do this? You did it until you had success, or you went hungry. So you had no choice about that. If you very patiently use your patience, that quality that's been hidden inside you for so long now, take the leaf in your hand, right in the middle of the leaf, and you're going to very gently pop open the midrib vein. And if you do it very, very slowly, It might take you a full minute to do this slowly. And you'll see inside of it these little strands of white that look like spider silk. It's actually latex. Dogwood is one of the trees that you can see that latex in its veins. So try that. That bark is hard to mistake too. So those are good things for you to look for. The edge of the leaf, the margin of the leaf has no teeth, like so many leaves do. But the leaves growing opposite, that's the big one. That and the bark pattern. All right, here is the famous cure that's been used hundreds and hundreds of years from dogwood. It is a fantastic fever reducer. Now, fever reducing is a really big deal, and people don't consider it that way anymore because it's pretty easy to address now, isn't it? I just know that there were probably so many awful experiences in the past of people having to be submerged into a mountain stream when you're desperate to get that person's temperature down. High fever kills, and if it doesn't kill, it can destroy parts of the brain. If fever cooks part of your brain, who knows what you would lose, some kind of motor skill or the ability to talk or smell or whatever. You just can't say what it would be. Fever is a big deal, was a big deal. Easier to control now. During the Civil War, both the North and the South issued as their military standard fever reducer quinine, which we import from a tropical place. Both the North and the South were experiencing so much difficulty with patients, victims of injury, because of all of the gross injuries that were incurred from cannonballs exploding or cannonballs hitting intact on somebody, removing legs, the Minier ball, which people generally call the mini ball. If you've ever seen one of those, it's like a big piece of gravel flying through the air that's going to just punch a terrible hole into you. So, and doctors had limited skills then. You know what the main tool was in the Civil War? The saw. You got rid of the limb that had the problem. And so you had lots of fever, infections, and also something that plagued the soldiers was malaria, typhus, typhoid, all of those things, high fever. So you had lots of soldiers quickly become non-functional in the war. Quinine could not be brought here fast enough. So guess what was used in its place? Dogwood. Word went out here in the South. All people who were left back at home, remove the bark from your dogwood trees. Not all of it, of course. You take certain limbs from the dogwood and give this to the provost marshal in your town. And then he sends it in a wagon to New Orleans. And there it was put in a big warehouse. And all this bark was around, and the outer bark was carved off of it, and this was sent. You're kidding. Oh my gosh. Time is flown. I just got the signal. What have I done? 3 slides? Okay. So these dogwood barks were kept in this warehouse and then dispensed out to wherever it was needed most. The North and the South were both doing this. Dogwood became the official fever reducer. So we've known about this for a long time. It's because of a chemical in it called cornic acid, which has some similarities to aspirin, but it seems to have a real specialized use for 2 things. One was the fever reduction, and here's how you make it. You already know this. You go into the inner bark of a limb, never the trunk, remember, just a limb, and you remove that piece, twice as long as your pinky, half as wide. You've already carved off the outer bark. You peel that up, put that in a cup, boil water, pour, 20 minutes later, you drink. That's your fever reducer. It also stops dead in its tracks a migraine headache. That's a pretty bold statement to say, isn't it? And I'm sure there's somebody out there doubting me right now. I've never had a migraine, so I can't tell you this worked for me. But I have now dealt with 11 different people who have lifelong problems with migraines. They're at my school, we're having a class, they come to me and say, I got to go home. I've got a migraine coming on. They all tell me, got to lie down for 3 days in the dark, in a quiet, dark place, and that's all I can do. I asked, would you like to try the Dogwood tea? And in each case they did, and in every case, symptoms disappeared. Person was back in class for the rest of the day, no complaints at all. That episode was over. It works. I've never seen it fail. It seems to be only the flowering dogwood that works. Sassafras is a well-known tree because it's, for one thing, it's got a name that's really fun to say. Sassafras is a native word, and it means green twig. If you look at sassafras trees, even in the wintertime, you'll see that their last year's growth of little branching is still green. It's got an interesting green coating on it. Sassafras has been known for a long, long time as a spring tonic. If you could go back 500 years and talk to some person who was living right here, why do you drink sassafras tea every spring? And they would tell you, well, it just makes me healthier. I don't know why. We now know why. Because, and this, by the way, is a tea made from the roots of the plant. And this is easy to do, very easy. It doesn't require any special measurements at all. You simply take a piece of root from sassafras, and you'll know you have it, the correct root, if you smell it and suddenly think about the last time you had a root beer. It smells exactly like root beer. So you're going to wash that off and put some score marks in it with your knife and put that in a jar with water, with warm, hot water, would be fine. And then when that water all turns visibly pink, when it just turns pink, then get yourself some kind of tongs and pull that root out of there because it's ready. You now have the medicine that you need. Why is it a spring tonic? Why does it make you healthier? Because inside of here is saffrol, a chemical that we know from experiments is carcinogenic, but it's a tiny amount. It's not enough to do us any harm. And plus, it's balanced inside the root with lots of other chemicals. Well, because the saffrol is there, when you drink the tea, your immune system overreacts to it. And what it does is, think of your immune system like an army. Well, when you drink sassafras tea, somebody just blew on the trumpet, which means get ready to do battle. And so the army beefs itself up and goes to that area where the problem is. It's a fact that this works because it's an immune booster. It's helping you to be more powerfully defensive about disease. Now, here's the newest thing we know about this, and this could save your life. It's hard to believe this story is about diarrhea, and what I'm telling you is that this could save your life, but here it goes. If you were lost, the most important thing you would need first would be water, much more important than food. And if you drank surface water from somewhere, even from a spring coming out of the ground, that is never recommended now anywhere in North America. There was a time when people did that regularly. They were acclimated to it. But now we have overwhelmed our rivers and creek systems with the things that we have made and all the waste products that we've made. So it's in the air and it comes down into the water. And our waste, our body waste, that's a big problem with streams. There's still plenty of places where you have illegal contact of human waste with water that goes right into the main rivers that are the water systems of certain towns. But what I'm getting at here is if you were to drink from surface water, and if you did get some kind of pathogen from that made you really sick, it could be that right upstream there was a dead possum in the creek and you didn't even know it. So you're going to get all kinds of bacteria from that. And that's the kind of disease that can just put you down on the ground. It's so painful, the cramps. You can't work. You just can't. You can't tough through this one. This one's got you. Dysentery. And the more that you release all those fluids, you know, what's happening there with diarrhea is that your body realizes, uh-oh, we have something that's invaded us here that is the enemy. So we need to get rid of it. It's come in through the mouth, so it's the digestive tract where all this flushing goes on. Every little duct that goes into the alimentary canal tries to pour water in there to flush out the problem. And that's why you get diarrhea. And in the meantime, you get dehydrated, right? So what do you want? More water. You see how it could be a vicious cycle? You go back to that same source of water and just things are worse and worse. This very same tea that I've already described to you from the roots will kill all of the bacteria in your gut, all of it. Now that's not necessarily a good thing. You shouldn't drink this tea as a recreational tea. You should drink it when you're down on the ground and you can't get to work. That's when it should be used, because it will kill those pathogens that are causing you all that problem. It works beautifully. I know from first-hand use that it works within 45 minutes of drinking a cup of that. From being useless to being not just better, but back to normal. It's an amazing medicine. This is the one that this gentleman who made so many stones in his life, this is the plant that changed his life. Pipsissewa, great word. The word means breaks apart the stone. The Cherokees who lived here had a propensity to make stones. That's probably, this is my guess, it's probably because one of the chemicals that is very common in our greenery here in the Southeast is called oxalic acid, a very lemony, tart acid. You've probably had it before if you've ever chewed on wood sorrel. It's what gives spinach its little tart tinge of taste. It's in chocolate. It's in lamb's quarters, if you've ever eaten that. But oxalic acid can be problematic inside the human body. If you have this propensity in your body chemistry to make stones, now that's not everybody, it's just some people. But if you happen to have that, when you eat oxalic acid, say you chewed on a sourwood leaf just for the fun of it, you know, like so many people do to get that nice lemony taste. The oxalic acid that goes into you, if it finds in your blood system free-floating calcium, it bonds with it chemically to make a crystal. That's the beginning of a stone. Now, there are other ways that stones are made, but this is a big one. So the Cherokee, if you look on their list of medicines, you see so many medicines that were used for stones. It tells you a lot. And you know what's funny? I've never read in a book the Cherokees suffered from making lots of stones. But anybody who looks at their medicinal list can glean that quickly. So Pipsissewa is the answer. And it works so well and so easy to make. If you make it from green leaves, you've got to use 2 teaspoons of very finely cut up green leaves. That's the only way you can measure in a teaspoon, right? If I said, go measure 2 teaspoons of leaves, how would you do that? You know, there's only one way. You cut it up into the smallest pieces you can. If you know that you have problems with stones, you can dry leaves. And it's going to make the tea process so much easier, because remember how the green leaf tea needs crushing? Lots of it. Well, dried leaves, you know how that works. It's ready almost immediately. So if you know you make stones, dry some of these leaves from Pipsissewa, and then after it dries, you crush it into a powder very easily. Then you can measure a teaspoon very easily. 1 teaspoon of leveled off dried particles of Pipsissewa leaves goes into 1 cup of water. There's your remedy right there. Once in the morning, once in the evening. The gentleman that I met in my county had made a stone every 2 months of his life from age 10 to age 47, which is when I met him. Now that was about 17 years ago, I believe, when he was 47, so he's going to be 54 now. He hadn't made another stone since I met him because of Pipsissewa. 1 cup in the morning, 1 in the evening. He repeated that the next day. And this guy knew the sensation of stones being made in the body, don't you guess? Probably the world expert on that. He said the sensation just went away and I never made a stone. Now, he used to capture his stones in a sieve when he urinated. He had trophies on his wall. I'm serious. He had 3 shelves of jars. 3 shelves of jars. These were his stones. The first thing he asked me is, you think we can find anything out there that could help with this? So that was the first thing we did. And he's never made another. Okay, I can't end my program without doing this one, because this is the one that everybody's going to eventually fall in love with. Jewelweed is an impatiens. If you have that potted plant impatiens at your home, you're lucky. It's going to work just like this wild one does. Impatiens, also called jewelweed, also called touch-me-not, is the plant that can stop any itch on your skin, including a chigger bite, the worst of all, including poison ivy. It can cure poison ivy in 2 days. A rash of poison ivy generally runs its course over 2 weeks. But if you use fresh jewelweed, and that's just crushing the stem or crushing some leaves and rubbing that into the rash, do that 3 times a day, and after 2 days, it's gone. It stops the itching, by the way, right away. It's just a marvelous plant. Okay, how to recognize it. From where you see, this shot, of course, is all about the flower. You don't get to see much of the stem, but there is a stem in the background. Can you see it? Kind of blurry. See the zigzag pattern of it? At every node or place where a leaf at least had come from, that's a place where it zigs or zags. So look for that. Also, look down at the bottom of the stem and the plant standing on its tiptoes. You'll see these roots arch down from the stem down to the ground into the mud. Almost always they do that. And there's a pigment there, pinkish purple, and it comes slightly up the stem a little bit. You'll also see that pigment show up in the leaf stalks. I'm not sure there's any in this picture here, and you'll see it also bleed into the midrib vein a little bit. Yeah, I can see some now. Some of that pink right there. Okay, it's a very, very succulent stem. You could easily crush it with just your fingers because it's full of fluid. That fluid is your medicine. It's a gel. It's mucilaginous, as a botanist would say. It's slimy. That's what that means. And that slime is your friend. It will stop a chigger bite's itch right away. I mean, within seconds. You see the teeth around the edge of the leaf? They look rather rounded, right? If you look really closely, you'll see that each little rounded tooth has a tiny bristle sticking out from the end. I'm going to point out one. I can see them easily up here. I'm not sure if you can from where you are. That's a thing to look for. Now here's the best identifier of all. Without touching the leaf itself, snap it off by its leaf stalk, so you're just holding the leaf stalk. Walk over to some water that's in sunlight and submerge the leaf and watch what happens. You won't believe this until you do it, but I'll tell you what it'll look like. It'll look like the leaf somehow converted into aluminum foil. It's that shiny. It does that because the leaves, though you can't see this, are covered with tiny hairs. And the hairs are really good at trapping air. And that all of that air pocket around the leaf gives you this incredible light show, this refraction and reflection. And it's hard to believe unless you actually see it with your own eyes. But I hope you'll do that. You've got this plant here. Yeah.
Just real quickly, 2 questions. Why is it called touch me not?
Because when it makes its seed pods, the pods are put together with seams. Okay, so they're individual parts. Like this is kind of crazy, but just think about a bunch of canoes glued together. All right, they've got seams between them, and there's a tension in it. And when you just bump it, they break, and it causes the seeds to spring out. So if you touch me, I'm going to spring all over you. That's what touch me not's all about. It's called jewelweed because of that brilliant shine. Even if you don't submerge the leaf, a dewdrop or a raindrop sitting on the leaf looks like a diamond.
And impatiens do this as well?
Impatience is what this is.
Okay.
This is impatience. Yes.
Mark, I'm very sensitive to poison ivy. We had a lot of jewelweed behind our house in North Carolina, and I would just do this all day.
Okay, can you verify for us that it works?
No.
It doesn't work for you. Do you get systemic poison ivy?
No, just, like on my hands and arms. But after about 4 or 5 days, I finally went and got some steroids. But I said, oh, great.
Well, the
jewelweed I'm done.
The thing about it is the jewelweed medicine works like cortisone without having the bad effects that cortisone has. You know, taking cortisone too much is not recommended for humans. You can use jewelweed as much as you like, though. But I'm surprised to hear you say that it doesn't work for you. What can I say? Except, sorry. With everyone else in the world that I've met who uses jewelweed, it works the way that I've told you. Okay, I know that I've already run over time. I've got two things that I need to do first before I say goodbye to you. One is that I have a passion for writing, and a lot of my love of all this goes into my writing. Some of it is nonfiction where, you know, I'm actually teaching the reader about these things. I have a series of 4 books called Secrets of the Forest that are all about not only helping you learn, but how to help your children or your grandchildren or your nephews and nieces or your school class or your scout troop, how to do that. You know, a lot of people who would like to see nature taught to a certain group are afraid to do it themselves because you know how complicated it is. And you can only say, I don't know the answer to that question so many times before you feel like a complete fool, right? So these are books that are designed to help people know how to get into that and to explore with the children to learn the things that you need to learn. So there's that. The only other nonfiction that I have is the very first book that I ever published is a memoir on the 2 years that I lived in a teepee. And the reason that time was so important to me, I had just lost my house to a house fire. So that was one of the impetus that, that set me in that direction. But it turned out to be just an invaluable couple of years for me because I was already completely immersed in the love of nature. But living in the teepee put me at the main intersection in nature, where, I was going to be there when things happen. There wasn't going to be a tree that fell this time that nobody heard. You're there to experience it all. And since you're at the intersection, things come to you. I had so many experiences with wild animals that some of them some people have not believed before, because I know one guy wrote a review of that book and said, well, we know that didn't happen, but he wasn't there. I wouldn't write it in there if it didn't happen. So amazing animal encounters. And what a great time for me and my own growth to feel more intimate with nature. To me, that's the thing that America is losing, is a relationship with nature. So the decisions we make no longer are based on our knowledge, our real basic knowledge of knowing how important plants are. I mean, gosh, they capture all the energy that's used on this planet. All the green plants capture the energy. Did you know that? Every energy that you use, if it's that, or sprinting, or climbing a tree, or driving your car, all that energy starts in one place, in a star that we call the sun. You and I can't receive it. We get a tan, maybe a little heat from it, not much. Most of the heat we feel comes right back from the earth. It's a reflected heat. But the green plants, they take energy out of sunlight. We all know that, but we never think about it, do we? We don't get to see it. And so it's easy to forget how very important trees are. I don't even know where I was headed now. What were we talking about? Okay, at the teepee. Yep. Just quickly, the other books. I love history, and I've got a lot of good friends who are major historians and write books. And I've gone out to places with them. We all love to see these things, places where things happened in history. I myself am not the person who wants to write the history books. I love novels, and I love to write novels. But the two blend together with historical fiction. That's where I really have enjoyed using my love of history. So I've written books on history that deal with the American West, because that's been an interest of mine all my life. I have a trilogy on a man that most of you will know if you're old enough, but if you were a room full of teenagers, I'd have to explain who this person was. Wyatt Earp. I've written a book about a young man whose life fascinates me. I would love to sit down and have a conversation with this young man around the campfire. His name was William Henry McCarty. And then his name changed to, they called him Henry. Then his name changed to Henry Antrim when his mother remarried. And then he had a big falling out with his father, who was no help to him at all after his mother died. So he changed his name to William H. Bonney. We know him as Billy the Kid. This guy is more than just an American outlaw. He is a fascinating life. So I've written a book about him called The Last Serenade for Billy Bonney. The last historical fiction that I wrote is on a man that I believe should be known all over America and is not known by hardly anyone. He is my number one white Anglo-Saxon hero of the American West. My number one would be Crazy Horse, who is not white Anglo-Saxon, obviously. But this man, his name is Nate Champion, and he was thrown into a horrible situation in history called the Johnson County Wars in Wyoming. I'm not going to go through all that, of course, but this man did something so heroic that I had to write about him. So I wrote a duology of his life. 2 books. Nate, the Texas story, Nate, the Wyoming story. My other books are novels. Many of them deal with the area where I live, in Dahlonega. Almost all of them deal with our area of the Southeast. I'm very proud to say that one of them gained me the title of Georgia Author of the Year. It's called The Song of the Horseman, and it's about a Cherokee horse trainer and his grandson. The Billy Bonney book just won, just a few weeks ago, the Arizona New Mexico Award for Best Historical Fiction. The Nate Champion book, the first book, Nate, the Texas story, I just found out last week, has won a Will Rogers Medallion Award. So I love bragging on these books because I truly feel like I'm bragging on them. You know, they become entities in themselves after they're finished, and I kind of release them, and they are what they are. I've got 2 books that are humorous, and they have a money-back guarantee. If I'm serious, if you don't laugh out loud while reading them, money back. You just got to find me. But there, I promise you, money back. And one of them is called Moon of the White Tears, and the other one is called The Western Trail Travesties. And the subtitle there is, and this might help you to know that this is a comedy, 5 little-known stories of the Old West that probably ought to have stayed that way. I had one guy, a historian on an internet group, write me and say, I just don't believe this stuff, you know. Well, I wrote back and said, if you looked at the cover closely, you would have seen, first of all, the word travesties, and second, you would have seen that subtitle. So the joke's on you. But anyway, those 2 have that guarantee. I'm not going to go into detail about those. I'll be over there to talk about them. But the last thing I wanted to say was this. I have a story to tell you, a very short story. It's, here goes. Here's the story. I was lucky to be born in a place where I wanted to be for the rest of my life. Really good neighborhood. Like any other place, there's some people there that you didn't get along with, but there were others who were very nice and helpful and that you loved and played with. And as I got a little older, the job that I had was in that same area, but it caused me to travel a lot throughout that area. And then some foreigners moved in. And we didn't know anything about them. Didn't know where they were from. Boy, it got quiet now when I started talking about foreigners. That's good. I like that. But one day, I just happened to be near one of those homes of the foreigners, and I saw a person there just waving at me like that. But I have to admit, I was always shy. I was not good about just walking up to strangers, and especially foreigners. You know, I just didn't know them at all, so I just kind of went my own way. Another time, I was in an area, and I came close to another one of those foreigners' homes, and they were eating something, and they threw it out to me. And I smelled it, and I'd never smelled anything like that in my life. It smelled so good. And so I tried it. It was good, really good. So I went home and told everybody about it, you know. So everybody was interested in where that was and kind of wanted to go see. And by this time, I had 2 children. So they were going out with me sometimes on my work. And once we went to near one of these foreigners' places, and the foreigner just came out yelling at us, had a big stick and started waving around. So I told my children, let's get out of here. So now we were really on guard about them, wondering. So one of my children thought, well, why don't we go out at night? Those people never stay out at night. we can just go walking around then. And so we went near one of these foreigners' places, and they had left out, I guess for us, a big container. And it was just full of great smells. We feasted that night. And the last night of this story, same deal. You know, we all went there, and I was going through the gift. And what it felt like was a huge, huge locust thorn went all the way through my body. And then I heard this loud explosion. And then I was dead. That's the end of the story right there. The story was told in first person, but it should have been a bear up here talking. The bear encountered people. We have a certain responsibility when we live with nature. I know this is preaching to the choir here. You guys are all like me. You want to be here because it's of this nature. And as you know, we have this responsibility. We have got to behave in a way that doesn't interfere with the way the animals want to behave. So if we have food that needs to be thrown away, our job is we've got to do that in such a way that we're not going to endanger animals. Because if you teach an animal to eat from your place, it's going to go to the other guy's home who wasn't waving a stick, but he was waving a .30-30 caliber rifle. Anybody have any questions they'd like to ask? Yes.
About the white pine, I've also heard that you can make a tea from the needles.
Needle tea is kind of a back to nature gimmick, in my opinion. To sip on a little bit of that is fine, but you're getting a tea of terpenes. You drink a lot of that, you're going to get nauseated. If you want to experiment with that, you'll be the first. I'm not willing to do that. I know what terpenes can do. And, you know, they're powerful. Your stomach is an incredibly strong piece of tissue. It can take a lot of abuse. Terpenes, nope. It'll make you sick. So that's the thing there. What I do with the pine inner bark, you know, I mentioned it was one of the wild edibles that can be used from trees. You've got to drive the terpenes out, though. And the way to do it is very easy. Put a flat rock on your hot coals. There you go. And 15 minutes just went up. So we flip the rock, wait for the next bell. 15 minutes later, flip the rock again. And then this time, flip it and drag it over to you. Now you've got a hot plate. You just put your strips of bark right on the rock. It drives the terpenes out. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
You mentioned that all trees have a hole in the middle.
Not necessarily a hole, but a pith. And often the pith is full of material, and it could be 3 different ways that the pith is structured. Piths can be just totally hollow. They can be totally solid, homogeneous all the way through. They can be, they can have little walls in them that interrupt each homogeneous filling, and then they can be hollow in between, like bamboo. When you think about splitting bamboo.
I've heard people who would take a tree down and say, "Oh, it was hollow in the middle, therefore it must have been diseased." Or
Well, you can tell if the hollow is a deterioration. A pith is not going to look anything like decomposition, but a disease is. It's real easy to see that. Yeah. Yes.
Are mountain laurel leaves poisonous
Definitely.
to animals?
No, just to
Or
you.
dogs?
I guess it would depend on what the dog is. And so I can't speak about all the different breeds, but what I can tell you is that I've watched deer eat the leaves many times.
Me too.
Uh,
They eat them in my yard.
I've watched raccoons eat the completely mature seeds of poison ivy, you know. So we know they have a completely different system, and they're not like us at all. But for dogs, I can't answer a question about your dog. I can say this, that the more mixed your dog is, the more natural it is, like a natural wild dog, and that's a much healthier dog. And the more bred your dog, I'm going to probably get a lot of bad press out of this one. But people here owning the purebred labs and all, but you'll have to admit, labs are a little wacky, right? You know, they're a little bit hyper. We take away We take away wildness and you take away some important instincts. And it's funny, some of the things they do that you disapprove of might be the very thing that's showing you that maybe their last instinct, like rolling in something they shouldn't be. You know, that may be the best instinctive thing they still have. Who else had a question? Somebody that, yeah.
It seems like in the very beginning, you mentioned, I think, a tree that had salicylic acid.
Mhm.
Aspirin, as we know.
Many trees make salicylic acid. The one that's most famous for making it because of the quantity is willow. And salicylic acid is the precursor of aspirin. So in a survival book, you might read, get a headache, chew on a willow twig. What they don't tell you in that book, but wait, I tell you in my book, it takes 8 hours for salicylic acid to be assimilated by the human body. And this is why scientists tagged on the acetyl part to salicylic acid to make aspirin. It works immediately. It's a good thing. That was a good lab move right there. Okay, I know, I'm sorry I've gone over time, but thank you for sticking with me.
Very good, Mark. Thank you very much. And a great living with wildlife story we'll all remember. Thank you for coming today. Have a great week, and we'll see you next month, same time. Take care.